Welcome in, everybody, ready to dive into the psychology of friendship and influence today. We're cracking open The Like Switch by former FBI agent Jack Schaefer. So get ready to learn the secret handshake of human connection. Think you're up for decoding some serious social intelligence.
Absolutely. What I find so fascinating about Schaefer's approach is how he takes these techniques he honed in the world of espionage, real cloak and dagger stuff, and makes them surprisingly applicable to everyday life. It's like he's saying the principles of building trust and rapport are basically the same, whether you're, say, recruiting assets or just trying to make new friends.
Yeah, it's almost like we're all secret agents in a way, using these tactics without even realizing it. So Schaefer kicks things off with his friendship formula. It's friendship equals proximity plus frequency plus duration plus intensity. I know it sounds a bit clinical at first glance, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you break it down.
Oh, absolutely. Each part of that formula really is crucial. Take proximity, for example. It's not just about physical closeness, but more about strategically putting yourself in someone's orbit. Think about it. Haven't you ever felt closer to someone you see regularly at the gym or maybe your favorite coffee shop? Even without having deep conversations, that repeated exposure kind of creates a sense of familiarity.
It's true. They almost become part of your routine, and then suddenly, bam, you're swapping workout tips or arguing about oat milk lattes. So
Right.
proximity sets the stage, but then frequency and duration come in to really build momentum.
Right, exactly. The more you interact with someone, the more those interactions accumulate over time and start weaving together the fabric of a relationship. Just think back to those early days of a new friendship. Texting constantly, meeting for lunch, sharing all those inside jokes. That's frequency and duration working their magic.
And then comes intensity. Shared experiences, especially those that trigger strong emotions, seem to solidify bonds like nothing else.
Makes me think about that time we went whitewater rafting, remember? Absolutely terrifying, super exhilarating, and we were instantly closer afterward.
Precisely. Those intense shared experiences, they really do leave a lasting impression and strengthen the connection. So if you think about one of your close friends right now, can you trace how your relationship might have developed through the lens of this friendship formula? It's really fascinating to see how these seemingly simple factors contribute to building deep bonds.
It's like a recipe for connection almost. But Schaefer doesn't stop at just formulas, right? He digs into those subtle cues we send and receive, often without even knowing it, nonverbal communication. And that's where things get really interesting. He calls them friend signals, things like an eyebrow flash, a genuine smile, or even a simple head tilt. And these signals, they have such deep evolutionary roots. They convey approachability and a lack of threat. Just imagine seeing someone flash their eyebrows at you. It instantly makes you feel like they're open and receptive to connecting.
It's amazing how we pick up on these subtle things without even realizing it. But what happens when you can't send those signals? Schaefer brings up this interesting Botox paradox, the idea that some cosmetic procedures might actually hinder our ability to make those natural, friendly expressions.
It's a thought-provoking point and really underlines just how important nonverbal communication is in shaping our social interactions. We might not even realize how much we depend on these subtle cues to form those first impressions and establish rapport.
It's a good reminder for all of us to be mindful of our own expressions, Botox or not. But beyond signals and formulas, Schaefer keeps coming back to this idea he calls the golden rule of friendship.
And it's such a simple but powerful idea. Make people feel good about themselves and they'll like you. It might sound obvious, but Schaefer actually provides some very specific techniques for putting this rule into action.
Like genuine compliments, empathic statements like, you must be so proud, or it sounds like you handle that really well. And even, get this, asking for small favors.
Yeah, the favor thing might seem counterintuitive, but it actually taps into something called the Ben Franklin effect. When you do someone a favor, even a small one, their brain starts to justify it, and they kind of convince themselves they must like you enough to have done it in the first place.
So it's not just about being helpful. It's about giving the other person an opportunity to feel helpful, and in turn, strengthening the bond between you.
Hmm.
That actually explains why I felt closer to that coworker after helping them with their presentation, even though it was a total last-minute scramble.
Exactly. Those little acts of reciprocity, they can really shift the dynamic in subtle ways, making someone feel more invested in the relationship.
So we've got the friendship formula, the power of those nonverbal signals, and this golden rule. But Schaefer throws in even more tools for connection with what he calls the laws of attraction. He covers a whole bunch, but I'm really curious about the ones that stand out the most.
Well, some are definitely more universally relevant than others, but let's dive into a few that offer some really compelling insights. First up, there's the law of similarity. We're naturally drawn to people who share our views and interests.
That makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah.
It's validating to have your beliefs and perspectives mirrored back at you by someone else. Creates a sense of belonging and being understood.
Absolutely. It's like finding your tribe. Then there's the more surprising law of misattribution. Have you ever noticed how a thrilling experience like riding a roller coaster can actually make someone seem more attractive?
Wait, really? Why is that?
It all comes down to our brains and how they sometimes misattribute the source of our arousal. So when your heart's racing and your adrenaline is pumping and there's someone you find attractive nearby, you might unconsciously connect those heightened feelings with the person rather than the roller coaster itself.
Wow, that's wild. So maybe a first date at an amusement park isn't a bad idea after all. What about the law of curiosity? Schaefer talks about planting these seeds of intrigue to pique someone's interest.
Curiosity is a powerful motivator, that's for sure. When we're intrigued by someone, we naturally want to learn more about them. Schaefer even shares a story about leaving a series of these mysterious notes to spark curiosity and eventually secure a meeting with a potential asset.
It's like that slow burn approach you see in movies.
Yeah.
You drop little hints, create a sense of mystery, keep them wanting more. Okay, last law of attraction I have to ask about. Scarcity. This is basically the classic playing hard to get, right?
Precisely. And it often works because we tend to place a higher value on things that are rare or difficult to obtain. So when someone seems unavailable, it can actually heighten their perceived value and make us more interested in pursuing them.
So it's all about finding that delicate balance between showing interest, but still maintaining a little bit of mystique.
Exactly. It's about hitting that sweet spot where you're engaging, but not overly eager, leaving them wanting to learn more.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground already, from the friendship formula and those nonverbal cues to the golden rule and even some of those laws of attraction. It's amazing to think there's a whole science behind building connections.
What I find so fascinating is that these principles apply not only to forming friendships, but also to influencing people in all sorts of contexts, from work to personal relationships. It's really about understanding the psychology of human interaction and using that knowledge to navigate the world more effectively.
But what about when we move all of this online? Do these same principles still apply when we're building relationships through screens? That's what I'm really curious to explore next.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how all of this plays out online because it feels like the digital world adds a whole new layer of complexity, right? I mean, there's that truth biasing Schaefer talks about, that tendency we all have to believe what we read online, even though we're missing those nonverbal cues you were just talking about. You're absolutely right. It's almost like we're hardwired to trust the written word, which can make us way more vulnerable to deception online, when you think about it. And Schaefer actually illustrates this point with a pretty cautionary tale about this professor who falls for a Czech bikini model he meets online.
Oh, wow. Okay, now that's a story I have to hear more about. A Czech bikini model.
Yeah, so this professor, he was totally smitten, completely head over heels. He believed everything this woman told him online, even though, they'd never actually met face to face.
Yeah.
He sent her money, even started making plans for their future together, all based on this digital persona.
All their interactions were through emails and messages, no video calls or anything like that.
Exactly, just messages. And then finally, when they actually arranged to meet in person, he discovers this pretty devastating truth.
Yeah.
It was all a scam. The model was someone else entirely.
Oh, no, he got catfished.
Yeah, exactly. Someone created this entire fake identity online just to deceive him. The professor ended up losing a good chunk of money, and, well, you can imagine the embarrassment.
Yeah. It's a tough reminder that online, it's so easy to get caught up in these idealized images, Without those nonverbal cues, we miss a lot of the information that helps us assess whether someone's being authentic, the kind of stuff we'd pick up on in person.
That's exactly why Schaefer really emphasizes the importance of video calls and, whenever possible, in-person meetings, Those kinds of interactions let us pick up on those subtle signals that just get lost in text-based communication.
It's about getting a much fuller picture of the person, going beyond that carefully crafted online persona. It also makes me think about how crucial it is to trust your gut. If something feels off, It probably is.
Couldn't agree more. Never hesitate to ask questions, verify information, and just generally take things slow, especially when you're in the early stages of an online relationship.
So let's say you're past those initial stages, right? You're getting to know someone, having those conversations, maybe even starting to build a bit of rapport. Are there any verbal cues we can look out for that might give us a glimpse into what someone's really thinking beyond what they're saying?
Schaefer actually has some fascinating insights about this. He talks about a technique he calls well, and something called the land of is, which can often reveal hesitation or even potential dishonesty.
Okay, well, and the land of is. Those sound super intriguing. Break it down for me.
So the well technique, it's surprisingly simple but really revealing. If you ask someone a direct yes or no question and they start their answer with well, it often means they're about to give you an answer that's not a straightforward yes.
Oh, I see. So it's like a verbal stall tactic. Their brain trying to figure out how to phrase a response that might not be what you're expecting.
Exactly. It's that tiny pause that kind of betrays their internal struggle. And then there's the land of is. This is where people go when they want to avoid answering a question directly. Instead of just giving a straight answer, they'll kind of dance around the issue, offer justifications, or just completely deflect with unrelated information.
I think I do that sometimes when I'm trying to dodge a tough conversation. Just like that, oh, look, a squirrel maneuver.
Right. And Schaefer uses this great example in the book. It's about this mother asking her daughter if she cheated on an exam. And instead of just saying yes or no, the daughter launches into this whole explanation about how much she studies, how wrong cheating is, and how everybody else does it anyway.
Total deflection. She's in the land of is, big time, trying to escape that direct question and avoid admitting the truth.
Exactly. And Schaefer's point is, when someone consistently avoids those direct answers, it should be a red flag. It might not be definitive proof of dishonesty, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It really does make you realize how much we reveal through our words, even when we're trying to be evasive. Like it's this subconscious slip of the tongue.
Absolutely. And being aware of these subtle cues can be so helpful in navigating those tricky conversational waters.
I know I'm going to be hyper aware of every well and every detour into the land of is I come across now. But of course, not all relationships are smooth sailing, right?
Yeah.
Even with the best communication and all the right intentions, sometimes things just don't work out.
That's very true. And Schaefer acknowledges that. He gets it. Not all relationships are meant to last. People change, circumstances change, and sometimes it's just time to move on. He actually lays out some of the most common reasons for breakups, things ranging from those diverging interests to needing more freedom.
It's definitely a part of life, but that doesn't make it any easier to go through, does it?
Mm-mm.
I'm curious if Schaefer offers any advice for how to handle those more difficult moments, especially in those long-term relationships where there's a lot of shared history.
He does. He talks about something he calls the break the glass technique. It's this prearranged signal that couples can use to interrupt an argument before it escalates into something really destructive.
So, like a safe word, but for arguments.
Precisely. Let's say a couple has this recurring argument that always seems to spiral out of control. They could decide on a phrase or even an action, like actually saying, break the glass, that signals they need to pause, take a breath, and maybe come back to the issue later when they're both a little calmer.
That's brilliant. It's like hitting a reset button before things get too heated. Gives both people a chance to step back, regain their composure, and re-engage in a way that's more constructive.
Exactly. It's a really powerful tool for de-escalating conflict and ultimately preserving the relationship, even during those rough patches. It's a good reminder that even when you're disagreeing, there are ways to communicate more effectively and protect the connection you've built.
Okay, so we've looked at how these techniques translate to the digital world. We've learned how to spot those subtle verbal cues, and even how to navigate some of those bumps in the road in relationships. It's amazing how much insight we can gain just by understanding the psychology behind these interactions.
And that's really the heart of what makes Schaefer's work so compelling, in my opinion. He provides these practical tools that we can all use in our own interactions, making us more attuned to those often subtle dynamics of communication in all its forms.
It's like he's handing us the decoder ring to human behavior. But even beyond the specific techniques and strategies, I think there's an even bigger takeaway here. It's funny because we've been talking about all these techniques for building rapport and influencing people. But now that we're aware of them, it makes you wonder, are other people already using them on us? Are we all just unknowingly participating in this elaborate social dance?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, think about those naturally charismatic people we all know, the ones who just seem to effortlessly draw others to them. Maybe they're not consciously applying techniques from the like switch, but it's very likely they've mastered many of these principles just through experience and intuition.
Right, like that friend who can strike up a conversation with absolutely anyone, or that colleague who always seems to get their ideas greenlit. Are they secretly using these techniques on us?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, they might just be naturally attuned to those subtle cues that make people feel good and help to build rapport. And, now that we're more aware of these dynamics, we might start to notice them at play everywhere.
It's like we've been given this backstage pass to how social interactions really work. But knowing these techniques can also feel like a bit of a double-edged sword, right?
Hmm.
On the one hand, it's empowering to understand how to connect with people more effectively. But then on the other hand, it makes you wonder if you're being subtly influenced without even realizing it.
Yeah, I think the key is to use this knowledge responsibly. We're definitely not talking about manipulation or trying to trick people into liking us. It's more about being mindful of how we interact with others and using these insights to build genuine, authentic connections.
That's a good point. It's about recognizing that these principles are always at play in our everyday interactions and then choosing how we want to engage with them.
Absolutely. It's about being more conscious and intentional with our communication, understanding that even those small gestures and subtle cues can have a really significant impact on how we connect with others.
So it's less about mastering a set of tricks and more about developing a deeper understanding of human nature.
Precisely. It's all about becoming more self-aware and understanding those subtle dynamics that shape our relationships with the people around us. And ultimately, I think that awareness can lead to more meaningful connections and much more fulfilling interactions overall.
I love that idea. It's like we're not just learning how to make friends and influence people, but we're learning how to become better communicators, better listeners, and ultimately more empathetic human beings.
Well said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the like switch, I want to leave you with this thought. Now that you're armed with these insights, how will you choose to use them? It's something worth thinking about as you move through the world and continue to navigate those complex and fascinating human connections.
It's such a good point. It's a really powerful reminder that we all have this capacity to influence the dynamics of our relationships. And by understanding the principles that are at play, we can make more conscious choices about how we connect with others and build a more fulfilling social landscape for ourselves and everyone around us. So go out there, be mindful, and see what happens when you start applying these insights to your own life. You might be surprised by the connections you forge and the influence you discover you have.